Hello and welcome to the program Moving Forward, a production of the Bain Grandstown Advancement Association. This program addresses the obstacles in the path of progress for the Bain Grandstown District and also for the entire nation. I'm your host, Reverend C.B. Mawson. Once again, welcome. Today is August 1st, 2017, Emancipation Day in the Bahamas. Today marks the 183rd anniversary of the abolition of slavery in the British colonies. This occurred under an act entitled the Slavery Abolition Act, passed in 1833 but implemented in 1834. And so we are enjoying today the 183rd anniversary of this act, and we are here to talk about this act, and we are very, very excited, those of us who are from what we call the original slave towns, and they are in fact Foxhill, Grandstown, Baintown, Gambia, and Adelaide. And we have this evening to discuss not only the overall picture of slavery, but as it relates to our individual villages, two representatives from those towns. We have next to me Mr. James Fernanda from Gambia, and he's going to tell us a bit about himself, but he is an icon in Gambia, being perhaps the oldest family resident in Gambia. And then we have Mr. Christophe Francois from Adelaide, and he's going to tell us about Adelaide a bit. Both of them are very, 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 very deep roots in their village. And so we want to just welcome you both to the program. Brother Fernando, we go way back, and Mr. Francois.
Thank you.
Well, starting with you, Brother Fernando, tell us a bit about yourself and as it relates to Gambia. We know that you were the past president of the Gambia Association for quite some time.
Yes, not only the past president, but I am one of the founders of the Gambia Community Development Association. Mm-hmm. And the Gambia Community Development Association was formed to involve all of the community, and especially the young people of the village, because you know, as time go by, the older ones are passing on, mm-hmm. and we are left behind. So we have to be the ones who would try to look out for all of those that are left with us.
And your family goes way back. How far back?
My family goes back to the 1800s.
In Gambia?
In Gambia.
Mm-hmm. Do you know how you got there? I mean, the original family?
My original family,
I mean, yeah, the first of your family. We know that it goes way back to
the Spaniards.
Yes, yes. And so we're going to discuss Gambia as a village in a little while, but let's hear from Brother Francois. Tell us a bit about yourself as you relate to Adelaide.
My name is Christophe Francois. a junior park warden for the Bahamas National Trust, and I'm a fifth generation Adelaidean. As far as I know, my great-grandmother, Florence Taylor, or what we call Granny Wah, she lived to be 115 years old.
Wow.
And what we saw, based on the photos that my family was showing me, she had deep-rooted Indian features. And it's said that her mother was of Indian descent, similarly, from Red Base, and they moved south later as she got older. And she came across along with my great-grandmother, Muriel Taylor, and they settled in Adelaide. And they raised her grandkids and also her kids in Adelaide. And so my grandmother, who's still alive, Gladys Johnson, who is a daughter of Muriel Taylor and a granddaughter of Florence Taylor, she raised us up in the old traditional way. You know, We lived on the beach, we ran around the beach, the forests. We visit some of the old buildings that still are in Adelaide. There are still some old slave huts that are in Adelaide. And basically she brought us up in a way that stood with me until this day, right now. And it makes me want to get involved to make sure that whatever that those our old ancestors left in place thrive beyond my generation.
Well, that's very, very interesting, because Adelaide, perhaps more so than any of the other 5 original slave towns, has remained almost as it was. Now, Gambia has also, but modernization has caught up a little bit with Gambia. It is caught up with Bain, Grandstand, and overtaken us. But in Adelaide, you all have remained basically as you were. You've got some landmarks in Adelaide, notably the Anglican Church there, and you've got some landmarks in Gambia that we're going to talk about, the well and the oven and all that sort of thing. But initially, we just want to look at slavery, the period of slavery in the Bahamas. We know from history that between the 15th and the 19th century, millions, upwards of 15 million men, women, boys and girls were snatched from their homes in Africa, packed into sailing ships and transported across the ocean, arriving in what was known as the New World because of the thirst for labor. And the Africans were strong, they were accustomed to working in the sun, and they were not being paid, so all of the benefits accrued to the slave master. Many of these persons died in that crossing, and that ocean is now referred to as the Middle Passage. Many of them died.
Yes.
And some cynical person once said they were the lucky ones because they died quick. But those who did not die, once they reached land in the New World, they were brutally treated. Not only physically, but emotionally, psychologically, every way. They were taken from their family, friends, from their community. They were placed in a strange land where they were not allowed to use their own name. Their religion was taken from them, their language, because they were forbidden to speak their native tongue, and they were dehumanized, because when you take all that away from an individual, you leave him with nothing. And so the African enslaved people were really brutalized. A lot of people do not fully appreciate the extent to that brutalization, because they talk about other races being enslaved, and that is true throughout history. Throughout history, the stronger races preyed on the weaker ones and so forth. But the African slave experience was totally different from any other race. If you were to look at the Jews, they were enslaved in Egypt. Our
Yes.
Bible tells us that. But there was a tremendous difference. While they were brutalized, they were also enslaved in Germany, or by the Germans. But the difference was they retained their identity. They retained their language. They retained their history. They retained their knowledge of the past. They retained their culture. Therefore, when they were freed, they just picked up basically where they left off at, because everything was there. When the African slave was freed, he was saying, now, what now? Where do I go? I don't know where I'm at. I don't know who I am. I don't have my history. I don't know who my family members are. And so he was left bewildered. That's the distinct difference between the Africans and the others who were enslaved. But getting to the Bahamas, over the centuries, many of these Africans found their way to the Bahamas, and they were pushed into these various towns. You remember in the year 1807 when the British government abolished the trading in slaves. They didn't abolish slavery. They abolished the trading in slaves, which meant that any foreign ship that had on board African people, the British Navy was empowered to stop them, remove the people, and transport them to the nearest British port. And that's how Adelaide, Gambia, Foxhill, Bain Town, and Grantstown became populated, because when they brought these persons, and they were not slaves.
No.
They were not slaves yet, because they were not sold into slavery. They were just being transported to the market to be sold.
To be sold, yes.
And they were then released, and that's why many of them were called free slaves. They were, they were never slaves. So those were the people that populated basically our towns, and we've had a terrible experience. But through it all, we came through. What are some of the experiences with the history of Gambia?
Gambia, we had people that came through, and they fought against the captain of the ship. We had a gentleman by the name of Mr. Morris, who was one of the men that really captured the ship and be landed in Gambia. And that is why the place that we live in Gambia was named after where we were taken from. We were taken from Gambia in Africa, and they named the village Gambia because all of the people that was on that ship came from Gambia.
That's right. As a matter of fact, his name was Elijah Morris, and this was in 1841. History says that there were about 135 persons on that ship, and he led about 20-odd slaves in overpowering the captain and the crew of that ship, and they took over the ship, and they wanted to go back to Africa, but they did not have the necessary provisions, and they could not make that journey, and so they decided to come to Nassau, and that's how they got to Adelaide. And there are some Morrises, descendants of Elijah, still living in Gambia, I'm told.
Yes. We are, for instance, with my family, we are related to all of the people that is in Adelaide. Those that are in Delaport, we are the Hylas in Delaport, the Morris in Adelaide, Morris, because we have the Morris in Adelaide and the Morris in Gambia.
Same family branch, the branch off of the
same family branch.
Yes, because this Elijah Morris was quite an individual.
Yes.
They said that this ship was headed from Virginia going to New Orleans with these slaves to be sold. Well, not slaves, but these captives to be sold. And he just decided that they were having none of that. He was a formidable individual, I'm told. And after they got to Nassau and settled in Gambia, they released all of them. And that's where they dispersed to Gambia, and I'm told some of the other surrounding areas. But that is a story that Bahamians don't know. That was the largest slave revolt or successful slave revolt during the whole 400 years of the slavery experience in the southern United States, led by a man that eventually populated to a large extent, Gambia. Now, your settlement.
Adelaide. So the inhabitants of Adelaide initially, majority of them came from off of a Portuguese merchant ship called the Rosa, or La Rosa. And it was established in 1831. And it was named, it's one of those 4 villages that were created by the governor at the time, Sir James Carmichael Smith. And they basically settled that area. The founding families were, of course, the Morris. There was the Smiths, and there were also the Taylors and Johnsons. Okay, and everyone in that community created, like my fellow persons from Gambia said, we are related to those in not only Gambia and Delaport, but also Mount Pleasant. Right, those 4 communities stayed united for a very long time. Only recently that it seemed to be a little separation.
Branching off a little bit. Yeah,
but it being closely united for throughout that course of history, where people moved throughout the different communities. And so there are still very intact buildings of freedmen in Adelaide. In fact, there are a whole about 2 buildings in the back of the western part of Adelaide that hasn't fully fallen in at all. Still strong, intact. Just like the church that's been around from the 1840s.
That's
St. James.
St. James.
Yes.
Baptist.
St. James Anglican.
Anglican Church. Okay, good. Well, listen. The record shows that when Sir James Carmichael Smith released the freed people to Adelaide, they gave Adelaide no support. No support. The people had to build their own houses and do everything for them. They were just deposited there because they didn't want them in the city of Nassau, because at that time the black population was growing too rapidly. And the white population in Nassau, the capital, became apprehensive of so many black persons around. So they just wanted to get them out of the main town, which was Nassau, and so they shipped them to these outlying towns, giving them little support, little encouragement, little help. And these people had to exist on their own. And this is what is so amazing, that they not only survived, but they thrived.
They did.
They got together, they built their homes, they got together, they formed fishing co-ops to go out and fish to supply their table. And it was only later, according to the history, that the government decided to just lend a little hand, build a school, and do some other kind of support work in Gambia, in Adelaide, but they just left them. We're going to come back and get really into things after this quick break. Don't go away, folks.
Only love can save us now.